The stories of Daniel in the Bible present a powerful testimony to the sovereignty of God over human affairs and the faithfulness of his servants in the face of adversity. Daniel's unwavering commitment to God, his courage in the face of persecution, and his trust in divine deliverance serve as inspiring examples for believers throughout the ages. Through Daniel's experiences, we are reminded of God's ability to work through ordinary people to accomplish extraordinary purposes and his ultimate victory over the forces of evil. Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, besieged Jerusalem and took some of the Israelites captive. Among them were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, young men of noble birth. The king ordered his chief official to select some of the Israelites for service in his palace, to be trained in the language and literature of the Babylonians. They were to receive a daily ration of the king's food and wine. Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the king's food and wine, so he asked the chief official for permission to eat vegetables and drink water instead. Initially hesitant, the official feared that Daniel and his friends would appear weaker than the other young men if they followed this diet. However, Daniel proposed a 10-day trial, after which they would be compared to those who ate the king's food. The official agreed, and at the end of the trial, Daniel and his friends appeared healthier and stronger than the others. So, they were allowed to continue with their chosen diet. Daniel interprets Nebuchadnezzar's dream, Daniel 2. In the second year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar had troubling dreams that troubled his spirit. He called for his magicians, enchanters, sorcerers, and astrologers to interpret the dream for him, but they were unable to do so. In his fury, Nebuchadnezzar ordered the execution of all the wise men in Babylon, including Daniel and his friends. When Daniel learned of the decree, he sought an audience with the king, asking for time to interpret the dream. Daniel returned to his house and prayed fervently to God for mercy and insight. That night, God revealed the dream and its interpretation to Daniel in a vision. Daniel praised God for his wisdom and then went to the king, offering to interpret the dream. Nebuchadnezzar recounted his dream to Daniel. He had seen a great statue with a head of gold, chest and arms of silver, belly and thighs of bronze, legs of iron, and feet partly of iron and partly of clay. With God's guidance, Daniel explained the dream's meaning to the king. The different parts of the statue represented different kingdoms that would rise and fall in succession. Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom, Babylon, was the head of gold, symbolizing its great power and splendor. However, subsequent kingdoms would be inferior, represented by the silver, bronze, iron, and mixed iron and clay parts of the statue. Ultimately, a kingdom established by God would crush all other kingdoms and endure forever. Impressed by Daniel's interpretation, Nebuchadnezzar praised Daniel's God and promoted him to a high position in his court, making him ruler over the province of Babylon and chief administrator over all the wise men. The fiery furnace, Daniel 3. King Nebuchadnezzar made a golden statue 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide, and he set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. He then summoned all his officials to the dedication of the statue. When the music played, everyone was to bow down and worship the golden statue. However, some astrologers came forward and accused certain Jewish officials, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, of refusing to bow down and worship the statue. Nebuchadnezzar was furious and summoned the 3 men to appear before him. He gave them one more chance to bow down and worship the statue, warning that if they refused, they would be thrown into a blazing furnace. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego boldly declared to the king that they would not bow down to any god or image, as they worshipped the one true God, who could deliver them from the furnace. Enraged, Nebuchadnezzar ordered the furnace to be heated 7 times hotter than usual and had the 3 men bound and thrown into the flames. As the king watched, he was astonished to see 4 men walking around in the fire, unharmed and unbound. He called them out of the furnace, and to everyone's amazement, they emerged without a scratch, not even smelling of smoke. Nebuchadnezzar praised the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, acknowledging his supreme power and delivering the three men from certain death. Daniel's interpretation of the handwriting on the wall, Daniel 5. Many years later, King Belshazzar hosted a great feast for 1,000 of his nobles, using the sacred vessels plundered from the temple in Jerusalem. As they drank wine from these vessels, Belshazzar praised the gods of gold, silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. Suddenly, the fingers of a human hand appeared and wrote on the plaster of the wall near the lampstand in the royal palace. The king was terrified, and his face turned pale. He called for his wise men, but none could interpret the writing on the wall. The queen mother remembered Daniel and told the king about his wisdom and insight. Belshazzar summoned Daniel and promised him great rewards if he could interpret the writing. Daniel refused the rewards, but agreed to interpret the writing. Before interpreting the writing, Daniel rebuked Belshazzar for his arrogance and failure to learn from Nebuchadnezzar's example. He then interpreted the words, mean, tekel, parsin. Mean meant that God had numbered Belshazzar's days and brought his reign to an end. Tekel meant that Belshazzar had been weighed on the scales and found wanting. Parsin meant that Belshazzar's kingdom would be divided and given to the Medes and Persians. True to Daniel's interpretation, that very night, Belshazzar was killed, and Darius the Mede took over the kingdom at the age of 62. Daniel in the lion's den, Daniel 6. Darius the Mede appointed 120 satraps to rule over the kingdom, with Daniel as one of 3 administrators supervising them. Daniel distinguished himself above the other administrators and satraps because of his exceptional qualities, prompting the king to consider promoting him to a position of authority over the entire kingdom. Jealous of Daniel's favor with the king, the other administrators and satraps plotted to find grounds for charges against Daniel. However, they could find no corruption in him, as he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. Knowing that Daniel was faithful to his God, the administrators and satraps devised a plan to trap him. They persuaded King Darius to issue a decree that for 30 days, anyone who prayed to any god or human except the king would be thrown into the lion's den. Despite knowing about the decree, Daniel continued to pray to God 3 times a day, as was his custom. When the administrators and satraps caught Daniel praying, they reported him to King Darius, who was distressed because he valued Daniel and did not want to harm him. However, he could not revoke the decree and, reluctantly, he ordered Daniel to be thrown into the lion's den. Before sealing the den with Daniel inside, Darius expressed his hope that Daniel's God would rescue him. That night, Darius could not sleep and spent it fasting. At dawn, he hurried to the lion's den and called out to Daniel, asking if his God had saved him. To Darius's relief and amazement, Daniel responded that God had sent an angel to shut the mouths of the lions, preventing them from harming him. Daniel was brought out of the den unharmed, and King Darius ordered the men who had falsely accused Daniel to be thrown into the den with their families. The lions overpowered them and crushed their bones before they reached the bottom of the den. Darius then issued a decree proclaiming the greatness of Daniel's God throughout his kingdom and beyond. He acknowledged that Daniel's God was the living God who rescues and saves, performing signs and wonders in heaven and on earth. Daniel's visions, Daniel 7-12. The book of Daniel also contains a series of visions that Daniel receives from God, providing insight into future events and the ultimate triumph of God's kingdom. These visions include the vision of the 4 beasts. Daniel sees 4 great beasts emerging from the sea, each representing a successive kingdom. The 4th beast is especially terrifying, with 10 horns and speaking boastfully. In the vision, the Ancient of Days comes and pronounces judgment on the beasts, and one like a son of man is given authority and dominion over all peoples. The vision of the ram and the goat. Daniel sees a ram with 2 horns and a goat with a prominent horn. The goat defeats the ram and grows great, but its horn is eventually broken, and 4 horns arise in its place. From one of these horns emerges a little horn that becomes exceedingly great and opposes the people of God. However, this horn is ultimately destroyed by divine judgment. The vision of the 70 weeks. Daniel receives a prophecy concerning 70 weeks, 70 sets of 7 years, that are decreed for his people and his holy city. These weeks are divided into 3 periods: 7 weeks, 62 weeks, and 1 week. The prophecy foretells the coming of the Messiah, who will be cut off after the 62 weeks. It also predicts the destruction of Jerusalem and the desolation of the temple. The vision of the kings of the north and south. Daniel sees a vision of conflicts between the kings of the north and the south, with various alliances and betrayals. These events culminate in the rise of a wicked ruler who exalts himself against God, but is ultimately defeated. The final vision and conclusion. Daniel receives a final vision that includes various prophecies about the end times, including the resurrection of the dead and the ultimate triumph of God's kingdom. He is told to seal up the vision until the time of the end, when it will be revealed and understood.